In this tutorial, we're going to be finishing off the Starry Night composite image we started in part 1 with some toning, sharpening, and dodging and burning. Hi again, Michael Volchinovich here from Vibrant Shot. You can find me on Facebook at facebook.com/vibrantshot and also at vibrantshot.com. So in this video we're going to be doing part 2 of our nighttime image composite, and essentially we're going to be finishing up the image today. And so in part 1 we started off with this sort of image here. We've got our base image. We add some blurring into our reflections. We extended the dynamic range of the image. We cleaned up a couple items down here in the bottom, and of course we spent most of the time working on our sky. So today we're going to carry on, and basically we're going to be working through a number of things, including adding a reflection of our sky into the water. We're going to be adding some dodging and burning throughout the image. We're going to be adjusting the colors, adding some haze, some glows, and then we're going to finish everything off with a little bit of sharpening. So let's go ahead and get started on that. So the first thing we're going to do is take care of our reflection. So I'm just going to create a group to help keep me organized here, and we're going to call this one land. Now I know that this group here will focus on everything that is related to the land. That's going to exclude the sky. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to add a layer mask to this as well, so that I don't have to layer mask out every single adjustment that I'm doing within this group. And so I'm just going to hold down the Option key or the Alt key on a PC, and we're going to grab our mask and we're just going to drag it up. So that's basically going to create a duplicate of our mask for us within our group. Now obviously that's not what we want. We want the mask to affect the land, not the sky. So I'm going to hit Command I, which is just going to invert my mask for me. So now everything is just going to be focused on the land portion, and the sky is going to be masked out. So what I'm going to do is I just want to create a cutout of this sky. Now we know that the sky is obviously masked out here, and we have a whole bunch of different adjustments. So I want to just grab the finished product of the sky. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go back and disable everything here, and we're going to click down on our active group, which is our sky group, and we're going to hit Command Option Shift E or Control Alt Shift E if you're on a PC. That's going to create a stamp visible layer of the actual sky for us and nothing else. So now we can re-enable all of our layers here, and what we're going to do is basically I can take this layer here, I'm going to throw it in my land group, and we're going to hit Command T or Control T if you're on a PC, and we're going to right click and we're going to say flip vertical. So now we're going to take this down, yes, apply transform, and we're going to drag it down. Now hold the Shift key down so that it drags down and doesn't go side to side on you. And as you can see, the reflection is never a perfect mirroring. It's actually stretched out somewhat. So basically what I want to do is I want to kind of match that stretchiness so that we can get a pretty realistic looking transformation here. So I'm going to actually stretch it out to the point where this edge meets the edge of the building, and then we're going to stretch down until the rest kind of aligns with the tops of the buildings. So let's say something like that. Alright, now the next thing we're going to do is add a layer mask to that, and we want to kind of soften some of these transition edges over here. So we're just going to grab our gradient tool, just make sure black is selected as your foreground color, and your gradient tool is set to foreground to transparent. So again, that's the second one in here. And also we're going to use the linear gradient, so just make sure that's selected as well. So we're just going to kind of go through a couple areas here, and we're just going to soften that. Just make sure that you're creating a fairly soft edge there. We're going to go over this again with the brush tool, but this is just a good starting point. Now obviously this reflection here will actually not start right at the bottom of this reflection, because the bridge itself is actually covering up some of our sky. So we want to make sure that we include that and we don't have stars actually encroaching into where this is. So we're going to take care of that with our brush tool as well. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to change this blend mode here to lighten. That way it makes sure to bring in all my light reflections over here as well. And then just going back to our layer mask again, we're just going to grab a big black brush. So we're going to make sure its hardness is 0 and the size is quite large, and then keep your flow rate fairly low. It can be around 5% or so. And then just kind of feather through and just mask things out along these edges here. And then we're just going to shrink down and just make sure that we mask it out everywhere that bridge actually is. So again, just using a very low flow rate here so that the transitions don't look unnatural. All right, there we go. So I think that's a pretty good start. Maybe I'll take a little bit out of here as well. All right, so the next thing we want to do is apply a blur to this so that it can match the blurring that we have everywhere else within our reflection. So basically we're going to go into Filter, Blur, and Motion Blur. And then the distance kind of, again, you don't have to play around with the exact number, but it looks like around 44 is a good number here. I don't want to go too little because then obviously it doesn't really match up. I don't want to go too high because then our stars will almost completely disappear, and that's really not what we want either. So I would say probably around 50 pixels in my case is pretty good. Now we can also play with the opacity a little bit, maybe take it down, and actually one thing I'm also going to do is add a curves adjustment to this reflection. So we're going to take our select our adjustment layer here. We're going to go in curves, and we're going to just hold down the option key and add this as a clipping mask. So we've covered clipping masks in part 1 of this tutorial. And now I'm just going to take the brightness down a little bit, and I think that that's going to be pretty good. So that's essentially our reflection done. Now the next thing we're going to focus on is adding some hazing in here and some dodging and burning and things of that nature. So let's go ahead and add a new layer here. And essentially I've spent some amount of time using the pen tool to actually cut out these various areas within our bridge here, as well as the bridge itself. So I'm going to demonstrate some of this using the pen tool, but I'm not going to spend the time to actually go through every single one of these areas because it's never an exciting thing to watch somebody pen tool out these selections. So I'm going to kind of give you an idea of how that works, and then you'd essentially just be repeating that multiple times. So before we enter the exciting world of pen tooling, let's actually just go ahead and add the haze because that's a pretty quick little process here. So all we're going to do is add a new layer. And just make sure that that layer is actually above our land layer, because in certain cases we don't actually want to mask out the sky for this haze, because I actually want some of that haze and glow to show around my lights and kind of blend into the sky as well. So we're going to change the blend mode here to linear dodge add, and we're going to select a color that is slightly yellow. And the reason is that we want that haze to look like it's picking up the color from our lights, which are obviously predominantly yellow. They're not pure white. So the best thing to do there is just to kind of sample a yellow color from here. That's a starting point, and then we're going to go in here and kind of refine that a little bit. So right now it's a little more orange than I'd like it to be, so I'm actually going to take it into the yellow realm and just something like that there. We can always adjust this color later, but we have to start with a color so that we can adjust it. It just makes it easier down the road. So to add the haze, you want to be using a flow rate of about 10%, and obviously very soft brush, zero hardness, and then size obviously is going to be depending on where you're adding the haze. So we're just going to add a few dabs throughout here under our bridge, just basically pressing down. That again is just kind of contributing to that ethereal kind of feel that we want in our image as a whole. So that takes care of that under the bridge. Now let's go ahead and just add some around the lights as well. Now don't be afraid to kind of overdo it a little bit at first, because we're going to obviously go back and tone down the amount of the hazing afterwards. And you want to experiment with different sizes of your brush. Just kind of mix it up a little bit. Add a dab with a larger brush. Excuse me. Add a dab with a smaller brush. Let's just make sure we've got them all. Here I'm going to be fairly conservative in terms of how many I add, because I don't want to cover up too much detail within the building itself. And when you're adding haze against a light surface, that haze really doesn't show up. So adding haze here really, I can, for example, add it there and it's really not noticeable because the background is fairly light already. Alright, so I think that's pretty good. Next thing we're going to do is we're just going to blur this out a little bit. So let's go to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur, and you don't have to add too much here, just maybe around 20 pixels or so, just to soften that up. toggling on and off. There we go. We see, these light glows always look nice too because they help the sky blend with the actual land as well. So it's good to have those along any of the lights. It just gives it a more natural appearance. And then the ones down below the bridge here really just kind of, again, serves to soften that and make it look a little bit more dreamy. Now, last thing I want to do here is just add a little bit of noise into that. So we're just going to go to Filter, Noise, Add Noise, and we're going to add about 10% just to not make it look like it's just been brushed in. So there's our haze. Let's just name that layer Haze so that we stay organized here. And the next thing we're going to look at is some dodging and burning. So let's go ahead and give you kind of a demo of how we're going to create selections around specific areas to help us with the dodging and burning using the pen tool. And then, like I said, I'm going to just use the actual selections that I already have. I'm not going to go through and make every single selection and put you to sleep. So let's go ahead and select our pen tool and just zoom in so that you can see everything pretty accurately. And we're going to start, basically we want our selection to just kind of encompass these curved areas here. That's where I really want to emphasize some of that curvature and just show off the shapes that are going through there. So let's pick our starting point here in the corner, and then we're going to click down again over here, and I'm just going to drag out, and that's going to create a curve for us. So basically the way the pen tool works is that these little anchor points that come out, they're like almost weights or magnets pulling up on the line. And so if I create another line over here, we see that that's really not what I want. I wanted this straight line. So what I'm actually going to do is just click my line all the way down to here, and I'm going to hold down the Option key or the Alt key on a PC, and I'm going to take this weight over here, and I'm just going to drag it down. And that's going to allow me to get back into a straight line there. Now again over here, I'm going to end my selection somewhere around here. So again, just dragging out to create a curve. And then I'm going to, again, hold down Option. I'm just going to drag this anchor over to the side here. And my next point will probably be somewhere around here. And I actually want to keep that as a curve because I want that transition to be pretty smooth once I'm actually dodging and burning in there. My next line is probably going to go to around here. And the next one, of course, is going to go into this point. So essentially, I'm just kind of picking points, and the idea is to minimize the amount of essentially points that you have. Like, you don't want to be clicking one after another. You want to pick strategic points to help you make as few points as possible and use sort of the curving tools that are built into the pen tool. So in here, obviously, I can't make one point and encapsulate all of this because there's a straight line up here. So I'm going to create one point to take care of our straight line. Hold down again Option key. If I'm not happy with the position, I can hit the Command key or the Control key and just move that around. So I can just grab it and let's say I want to position it right there. And then what I can basically do is I should be able to take care of this all in one shot. So I'm just going to click down. We're going to drag out. Whoops. Let me just go ahead and zoom out a little bit so we can actually see what we're doing. As we can see, that's not what we want. So let's go ahead and refine our point here. So holding down Option again, we're just going to adjust our curve here. There we go. Now you don't have to be super precise here. We're going to be feathering it a lot when we actually do our dodging and burning. So really, it's just a matter of more or less capturing the same shape, but you don't have to be super precise. So essentially, there's our actual path that we've cut out, and as you can see, if you go into paths, they show up in here. Now just make sure that if you're doing these as individual paths, after you create your path, you save it. So basically, to save it, all you have to do is give it a name other than work path, because what will happen is with work path, if I start creating a new path now, it will override the work path. So just make sure that you save all of those by giving them a name. So basically, if I click there, as you can see, if I start now pen tooling out again, my work path is gone and I've lost it. So again, another reason you have to save it, otherwise you'll lose it and you'll be very frustrated because you'll have spent all that time making the cutout and then it's going to be gone. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to use one of the existing cutouts that I have here because it's already there. I believe it's this one here. It looks more or less the same as what we just selected. So let me just go back here and I'm actually going to create some dodging and burning layers in here for myself. So I'm going to go in here. I've got an action for doing this, and I've got a whole tutorial on dodging and burning as well, where we cover a variety of different methods for dodging and burning, so be sure to just check that out. Essentially, I'm just going to run my action here, and it's going to build my layers for me. So all these layers really are is just my burn layer is a curves adjustment that is going down, so it's darkening, and my dodge layer is just a curve that's going up to brighten. And I'm actually going to pull this up a little bit more in this case. Everything has been inverted on our mask, so essentially nothing is showing right now. And oftentimes what I'll do is I'll also blend these with luminosity blend mode to prevent any sort of color changes as I'm dodging and burning. So now that we've got those dodging and burning layers in place, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back into my paths. I'm going to select all of these paths here. So that's basically going to give us something like this. And we're going to convert these into a selection. So we're just going to click on selection up here, or you can actually click on this little icon down at the bottom, and that's going to convert it into a selection for us. Now I'm going to hit Q just to go into quick mask mode, and basically we can refine all of these by just going into filter, blur, and Gaussian blur. I'm just going to blur them out a little bit so that the transitions are fairly light. So around 21 pixels should be good in this case. And I'm also going to grab my brush, also make sure that its hardness is once again at 0%. Flow rate around 10% is good. I'm just going to kind of brush in the bottom here. I just want to make sure that, we feather around this edge down at the bottom here. I want to make sure it's nice and smooth. Similarly up here too, just making sure that that kind of eases in there. Okay, and now we can hit Q again. That will get us back into our selection view. And we're going to go into dodge. Now I'm also going to just hit Command H, which is going to hide this, or if you're on a PC, hit Control H. And so our selection still exists. If I hit Command H again, it just brings it back, but at least I don't have to see those marching ants, which can be a little bit distracting. So now we're going to select white as our foreground color, and we're just going to start kind of painting in here a little bit. Again, using a nice soft brush, this is always going to look fairly natural, and the good thing is we're constrained to these inner areas. We're never going to start dodging and burning outside that. Okay, so let's just step back, see what we've got. I think that looks pretty good. So now again, hitting Command H, and I'm just going to hit Command D or Control D to deselect that. Now basically with the remainder of the dodge and burn, we just want to kind of tidy a few things up and then brighten certain areas, but for the most part we're not going to be doing as much dodging and burning as I normally would be doing, simply because we've already taken care of a lot of the dynamic range problems that we had right at the beginning. So in part one, where we blended those two exposures, that really helped to brighten up the areas we want brighter. So not going to be too much dodging and burning in addition to what we just did, but let's just go into a few areas here. And you don't have to be super precise with this, just keep a nice soft brush. And we also know that we are constrained here into the land only. So if I start brushing up at the top here, we know I'm not going to go into the sky. It's always going to keep me constrained into my land portion. So that's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm just going to brighten up a couple more areas over here. Just bringing out a little bit more detail. Just to kind of balance out the exposure across the top of the frame here. And you don't want to make it completely even, like you want to just, highlight the areas that need to be highlighted and then just extend the dynamic range a little bit, but you want to keep shadows in place because that's what creates depth in our image. So I'm not doing anything too fancy here, just brushing with a nice big soft brush. Maybe adding a little bit more to our reflections here, just brightening them up a bit. a little bit within the blacks of our bridge just to help bring that out a bit more. As you can imagine, there's not going to be too much involved on the burning side of things for this particular image, because we don't really have anything that we want to darken too much, but there's going to be a little bit. I'm actually going to bring out this portion of the reflection a bit more as well. Actually, you know what? I don't like that. Let's just keep that obscured. And I'm just going to brighten this whole building overall. Alright, now going into my burn layer, this is essentially going to darken certain areas. So I'm actually going to darken up over here. It's a little bit too bright. Just going into the edges of the buildings here just to create a little bit more depth and dimension. Alright, and then essentially in here we can also burn in some of the shadows within our greenery over here. I do like to burn in this bottom area where it should be a tiny bit darker just to create some separation between the water. I know we already dodged some of this in, but because we are using adjustment layers, we're not degrading the image quality too much here, because it's actually going to, Photoshop's going to figure it out that, oh, it's been brightened here, darkened there, and it's not essentially going to do that twice. Now, if you were doing stamped visible layers of your layers every time, and you were lightening and darkening over and over again, then you would be degrading the image quality, but that's, again, another reason why you want to use adjustment layers for your images. Again, I just don't want to spend too much time on this because I know it's probably not something that's overly exciting to watch me do. But just trying to give you an idea of the certain areas that I dodge and burn. Basically, my goal with dodging and burning is to always build a sort of three-dimensional feel into the image, and you do that by adding shadow. So we can now kind of highlight shadow along the top here. And again, I'm going kind of in a curve to just make it seem smooth and realistic and sort of flow with the existing shadow within our image. And dodging and burning, like I've said in the previous tutorial, it's really just one of those things that you have to practice and get good at. It's sort of where the artistry comes in retouching. Ultimately, it's just a matter of getting a feel for, where you should be dodging, where you should be burning to help make the image look good. So I'm just going to dodge in a few areas here as well. Alright, I think that's good enough for our purposes. I'd probably go in and refine this for another 10 or 15 minutes if this was a final image, but at least this gives you an idea of the kind of things that I look for when I'm dodging and burning. So if we just kind of toggle that on and off, we see that we kind of help to bring the image alive a little bit more and just kind of balance out some of the exposure across our buildings here, and obviously help to further accentuate this curvature within our bridge. So next thing we're going to do is actually start adjusting some of the tonalities within our image. So there's a couple of different things that we have to do there, and again, I'm going to add another group for that so we can again just stay nice and organized. And we're going to name our group color. So everything, once again, even though we're creating a new group, it is constrained within our land group, so all of our changes are only going to affect the land portion of our image. So basically I'm going to create two selective color adjustment layers. So the first one is going to work on some of our whites. So basically I'm going to go into whites here. I'm going to increase the amount of yellow in our whites. This is just going to make sure that the whites aren't really pure white in here, that they get infused with a little bit more of that yellow color that we have from all around here. Then we're going to go into our blacks, and we're just going to take down our yellow slider, which essentially is just adding more blue so that we just match up with the blue that we have up in our sky. And then finally, we're going to go into our green channel here, and I just want to play up some of these green colors. I just want to bring them up a little bit more. And obviously magenta is the opposite of green, so if we want to add green through here, we have to take away magenta. So we just kind of drag that down, and I think around here should be pretty good. So that's just a subtle adjustment. I mean, if we look at that, we've just added a little bit of blue here and just made those greens pop slightly more. Our second adjustment, we're going to go in again, select selective color, and we're going to be focused on making some of these red tones pop a little bit more. So we're going to go into reds, and we're going to play with our cyan slider here, which essentially is when I take away cyan, I'm adding red, because again, cyan, red are opposites. So we're just going to take that down to somewhere around there. We're going to take our our magenta color, and we're also going to increase that slightly, so maybe around +4. And then with our yellow, we're going to increase the amount of yellow, because I think right now it's looking a little too pale, so I do want to add a little bit more yellow into those reds. So maybe go around +10 on that. And then finally, I'm just going to take away a little bit of the overall redness just by going -1 on our black slider. So I think that's pretty good, and if we actually look at the before and after, we see that the colors are already looking a lot better. Now, where I don't like some of these changes that I made here, just name this one blacks, or sorry, reds, so that I know which one is which. Now we'll just call this one blues. Okay. So where I don't like it is actually on this bridge here. I don't really want to apply that into there because I don't think it really looks good, and we shouldn't really have too much red color in there. The red here is really as a result of the warmer lights that we have and some of the reflections off the buildings, and obviously I want that complementary color between the red and the blues going between our sky and our land. But here I don't think it really looks good, and it's just kind of unnatural that we would have all this red coloring in here. So what I'm basically going to do is I'm going to take our existing path that I've cut out of our bridge, and I'm actually going to convert this into a selection as well. So just holding down our little selection icon down the bottom here. And then what I want to do is, again, I'm going to go into quick mask mode. Yeah, there we go. And I'm just going to pick a big brush, and we're going to again just brush down in here because I want to soften that transition point. Just along the top here slightly as well. And I could just blur this with a Gaussian blur, but I just want to do it with a little bit more control here. There we go. And I can just finish the whole thing off with a little bit of a blur as well. Actually, that's too much. Let me just go to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur, and let's take that down to just a couple pixels here, so we don't get a hard edge, essentially. Now hitting Q again, that takes us out of quick mask mode, and I'm just going to go into our reds here, and I'm going to fill it with black. So since black is our background color that we have selected, I'm going to hit Command Delete or Control Delete, and that's just going to mask that out. So now I've deselected everything again. I'm just going to brush, actually, I'm going to make black my foreground color now. You can just hit X to toggle between your background and foreground color, just so you know. And I'm just going to brush some of this bottom portion out as well, because I don't want the reflection to be too red either. Alright, there we go. So now if we kind of toggle through that, we see that we've made that adjustment, but we haven't adjusted the bridge too much. So that pretty much takes care of our color adjustments. Now the next thing we're going to do is make our whole land kind of glow a little bit and infuse it with a little extra contrast. And a cool way to do that is to basically create a stamp visible layer. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to come up here and let me just make sure there's nothing I want to exclude here. Actually, there is. I don't want to include my haze in my stamp visible layer. And I think everything else should be okay. So let's go ahead and just make sure your haze layer is disabled. Just go to the top group that we have here, the land group, and we're going to hit Command Option Shift E or Control Alt Shift E. That's going to create our stamp visible layer. And now we're going to go into Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur, and we're going to blur it at around 2 pixels. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to go into our mode here. We're going to just change the blend mode to soft light. And let's just drag this down into our land layer. We can re-enable our haze layer too. And next thing we're going to do is we're going to double click on that, and that's going to take us into our blend if sliders. So what we want to do now is hold down the Option key or the Alt key, and we're going to drag the one slider into the middle, and we're going to drag the other slider into the middle. Click OK, and then we're going to just kind of take the opacity down to something that that looks pretty good. Okay, and actually, you know what? I'm going to make sure it doesn't affect my highlights quite as much. So I'm actually going to take. So what I'm basically doing with these blend ifs, and I've covered them in past videos, is this just kind of says, okay, anything that's in the underlying layer that is, really dark, like if I take this down, it won't affect the blackest parts of the underlying layer. So it'll just, basically this layer won't go through. If I'm splitting it this way, what I'm saying is just kind of gently gradate between this darkest point into my midtones, and then here I'm saying if it's pure white, don't affect this. Start at around this level of luminance and then go down into around our midtones. So I'm actually going to kind of clip this like this. So now again, just toggling that on and off, we see it kind of adds a little bit of contrast, really kind of enriches the color, and once again just plays up that more dreamlike quality that we have within our image. So I'm going to probably take that down maybe a little bit more to 70% or so, and I think that looks pretty good. And obviously it's just affecting the land because we've put it into our land group, which is masked out the sky. So now we're actually going to finish everything off with a little bit of sharpening. So we can do that just by, again, creating a stamp visible layer. So Command Option Shift E or Control Alt Shift E. Actually, one mistake there. Let me just go back. So I don't want to duplicate my haze twice. So even though I had this layer selected, when I'm creating my stamp visible, I'll actually stamp visible everything that is visible. So let me just make sure that my haze layer is selected. Hit Command Option Shift E. Recreate my stamped layer, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into Image, Adjustments, Brightness, Contrast, and we're going to take out the contrast. Now this sharpening process is explained in my image sharpening video, so if you're not following along with what I'm doing here, just be sure to go in there and check that video out. We'll actually explain why I'm doing all of these steps, but in this case I don't want to repeat myself, so just kind of follow along. Now I'm going to create another copy of this layer here, and basically what we're going to do is we can disable this one. We're going to blend it with Vivid Light Blend Mode. We're going to go into Filter, Other, High Pass, and we're going to add 1.5 pixel high pass here. Then we're going to go into this one, enable it, and we're going to go into soft light. Once again, filter, other, high pass, and we're going to take about 10 pixels on this one. Okay, so as you can see, what they basically do is the 10 pixel one will help to take these larger areas and add a bit of sharpness to them. So basically it will kind of redefine these larger portions once it updates here. There we go. So if you kind of look at these large areas within the bridge, if we re-enable that, and then everything kind of just tightens up a little bit. It's almost like taking the clarity slider in Lightroom and increasing it. Now with this one, it's going to work on the finer details. So all the little fine areas within the building, the edging of the windows and everything, that's really going to pop. Now obviously this is too much. We don't actually want to apply this much sharpening. So I'm actually going to take this down on the vivid light layer. I'm going to take it down to probably around 50%. On our soft light layer, I'm going to take it down to around 80%. And then we're just going to create a group around this. So I'm going to select both of these layers. I'm going to hit Command G or Control G if you're on PC. And I'm going to call this Sharpen. I'm going to take it down another probably 20% here. I find we always have a tendency to over-sharpen things, but even with those reductions in opacity, you can see what a huge difference that sharpening actually makes. Now, one thing I don't really want to do is I don't want to sharpen the sky too much, and I don't really want to sharpen this bottom portion. So I'm going to go ahead and add a layer mask on top of that. We're going to go back into our gradient tool, black as our foreground color, and foreground to transparent with a linear gradient. I'm just going to drag through and kind of just, gently gradate across the sky so it's not sharpening things too much. And then here I'm going to just grab kind of from the midpoint, go up, and again just blur that out, because really there's no need to be applying any sharpening here. It's just going to add noise into the water, and this is all blurry anyway, so we don't really want to be doing any sharpening there. So there we go. It's really just sharpening our buildings. And now if you feel that there's any additional color adjustments you can make, we can do that to the global image as well. We can just go in to our selective color, and I feel as though like the blues, for example, could probably use maybe a little bit more cyan. And then let's see, with the magenta slider here, maybe take away a little bit of magenta. And let's see here, whites are pretty good. So I think that actually isn't too bad. Maybe play with the reds a little bit. I think we're pretty good on that front, so let's just go ahead and reset that. So all we really did was we went into the blues and I just added a little bit of cyan and took a little magenta away, and all that's really doing is just taking some of that purple color out of our sky. I want it to be more blue as opposed to purple. So anyways, that is pretty much our entire image from start to finish. Obviously, again, if there was more involved in what we just covered, I think this tutorial is probably running around half an hour. But obviously, when you include all of the pen tooling that you have to do for both the sky cutout and the bridge, this sort of edit will probably take you anywhere from 2 to 6 hours, depending on how long you're cutting things out. And again, this was the bulk of the time. I spent probably about 2 to 3 hours just cutting out the sky on its own. But anyways, I hope you found that useful, and it gives you some tips for editing your nighttime images and just making them look a lot more interesting. And obviously, if we kind of look at where we started down here, we've got this fairly bland image, and then we finish off with something that is a heck of a lot more interesting and just more pleasing to the eye. So if you enjoyed this tutorial, click on the subscribe button below to make sure that you get future updates, and also follow us on Facebook for more photos and articles at facebook.com/vibrantshot. And we'll see you next time.